Good afternoon. My name is Carol Chin, and I have the privilege of serving as the principal of Woodsworth College. On behalf of Woodsworth College, I would like to welcome you to the first ever virtual presentation of the annual Sefton-Williams Memorial Lecture. Because it's the first virtual one, we may have technical glitches, we'll see. Our audience today may be scattered geographically, but since some of us are here in Toronto, I would like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Also on a day today where we're all meant to be reflecting on the legacy of residential schools in Canada, I would like to invite everybody to consider what traditional land you may be located on wherever you are. If you would like more information on how to find out about land acknowledgements, you can go to nativeland.ca, that's native-land.ca. Woodsworth College is home to some 5,000 students studying in the Faculty of Arts and Science here in the University of Toronto. We are proud to offer access programs to post-secondary education through our Millie Rotman Scheim Academic Bridging Program and our Diploma to Degree programs, which work with community colleges in the Greater Toronto Area. We are also proud to collaborate with the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources, with whom we co-administer the center's undergraduate program. The Sefton-Williams Memorial Lecture Series is a joint venture with the center and a testament to our very close working relationship. The annual lecture is dedicated to the memories of Mr. Larry Sefton and Mr. Lynn Williams. Larry Sefton's career in the labor movement began on the picket line in Kirkland Lake in the gold miners' strike during World War II. He subsequently led the 1946 Stelco strike and later held office in the United Steelworkers of America, eventually becoming the director of District 6. He earned the respect and admiration of those who worked with him. Lynn Williams began his career initially organizing campaigns for the Canadian Congress of Labor. He was named to the USW staff in 1956, was a delegate to the founding convention of the NDP, and eventually went on to become the first Canadian to serve as the president of USW International. He was a leader in promoting cooperation and solidarity in the international labor movement. After retirement, he served as president of the Steelworkers Organization of Active Retirees. Lynn Williams was in fact the inaugural Sefton lecturer in 1983, speaking on the apt topic of the labor movement and the university. After his death in 2014, the lecture series was renamed Sefton-Williams in order to jointly honor both of these important leaders. I would now like to hand things over to Professor Dion Polar, acting director of the center, who will make a few announcements and then introduce our speaker today. Dion.
Thank you, Carol, and good afternoon, everyone, or morning or evening, depending on where in the world you are. On behalf of the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources, I would also like to welcome you to the first ever virtual presentation of the annual Sefton-Williams Memorial Lecture, and what is likely to be a record turnout for this event. While we miss seeing each other in person this year, the one major advantage that the virtual format offers is that we are able to include more people than we could normally fit in Kruger Hall and Woodsworth College, and from different places around the country and the world. Since 1965, the center has been an important site for the interdisciplinary teaching, research, and learning about all aspects of work and employment relationships. We now offer a full suite of undergraduate, master's, and PhD programs, and we've experienced quite substantial growth in all of our programs and faculty complement over the past 5 years. So the center is an exciting place to be these days. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to make a few announcements. First, with the help of several major donations this year, the center was able to establish 2 new awards. One of these awards is for CIRHR PhD students who achieve research excellence during their doctoral program. This doctoral prize for research distinction was made possible from a generous gift from a PhD alumna, Ting Ting Zhang, who herself excelled in her doctoral research undertaken at the center. Ting Ting's dissertation on the relationship between occupational licensing unions and earnings was awarded the 2018 Thomas Kochen and Stephen Slay Best Dissertation Award by the Labor and Employment Relations Association in the United States. And parts of this work have since been published in top academic journals in industrial relations. The other new award has been established with the help of two significant donations from the Power Workers Union and the Society for United Professionals, and as well as numerous individual gifts from the friends, family, and colleagues of Matt Dowdle, who graduated from the Master of Industrial Relations program in 2004, and who very sadly passed away on March 3rd. A standout alumnus of our MIR program who remained actively engaged with the center, Matt had a stellar career in labor relations, first at Capgemini and later at OPG, where his compassion for others and deep understanding of human nature underpinned an outstanding career that culminated as Vice President of Labor Relations. The Matt Dowdle Leadership Award in Industrial Relations and Human Resources will be provided each year to one graduating student and one alumni from our Masters in Industrial Relations and Human Resources programs who have displayed qualities of leadership and team building. The last announcement I will make is that normally at this lecture, we also present an award, the Sefton-Williams Award, to honor someone who's made significant contributions to labor relations. I would like to congratulate Brad James, who's the 2020 recipient of this award. Throughout his 30-year career with the United Steelworkers and with Unite Here Canada, Brad has been an important part of union efforts to build an increasingly diversified membership. He led the successful diversification of USW membership beyond its roots in mining, steelmaking, and manufacturing to build new membership groups in the service sector and in white-collar workplaces, including at the University of Toronto, where, as regional organizing coordinator for the USW, Brad worked with a large team of University of Toronto administrative and technical staff in their successful bid to join the union in 1998. Brad has also contributed frequently to the center, where he's become a very welcome fixture, volunteering his time to speak at career events, consulting on projects, and at one point teaching labor relations in the undergraduate program. Through his more recent teaching of union management relations and industrial relations at Ryerson University, as well as ongoing consulting work with labor unions, employee groups, and associated organizations, Brad continues to make significant contributions to both the present and the future of labor relations in Canada. I would also like to take a moment to welcome Brad's students from one of his Ryerson courses, who I understand are joining this talk for the second part of their class today, as the topic of their class is appropriately on union formation and organizing. So congratulations, Brad, on your receipt of the 2020 Sefton-Williams Award for Outstanding Contributions in Labor Relations. And we so hope to be able to present the award to you and celebrate in person soon. And with that, I have the honor of introducing our 2020 Sefton-Williams speaker, who's one of the most prolific union organizers I've ever personally known. Kris Rondeau is the director of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees New England Organizing Project. She has been a union organizer and contract negotiator for over 4 decades. And Kris, I found that incredible because that is longer than I have been alive. Kris and her colleagues navigated the Harvard Union of Clerical and Technical Workers to victory on May 17, 1988. Members of her team went on to organize UMass Memorial Medical Center and UMass Medical School in Worcester, Massachusetts. This was the largest successful union drive in central Massachusetts in the last 60 years. Kris continues to guide the UMass Worcester Union, made up of state healthcare and research employees, as well as the Union of Social Workers at the Cambridge Health Alliance in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Over the years, Kris and her team have organized 30,000 workers, mostly women in the service sector industries of healthcare and higher education, workers who are right now on the front lines of service provision during COVID. Note that Kris will speak for approximately 30 minutes, after which I will moderate a question and answer period. You will be able to submit your questions to Kris during and after her talk using the Q&A function. And I will try to get to as many questions as I can. With that, please join me in warmly welcoming Kris Rondeau. And Kris, I'm going to ask you to unmute now.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Dion. Thanks for inviting me to the Sefton-Williams Memorial Talk. I didn't know Larry Sefton, of course, but I knew Lynn. He was a friend, and I was a fan. His intelligence, goodness, and curiosity made our entire movement better, and it's an honor to honor him. And thanks to all of you for coming. It's such a relief to be in Canada. My hobgoblin's hat is heavy. My heart is heavy. This is a heavy, hard time. And yet, I'm glad to be here with you, even if it's not in the way that we imagined when I was invited to give this talk with its hopeful title, Organizing with Heart. Let me back up. I did say hobgoblin's hat. I have this top hat that I refer to as the hobgoblin's hat, after the hat in the Moomintroll books, Tove Jansson's wonderful series for children. In those stories, the hobgoblin's hat does the magic of transforming. The hobgoblin's hat makes ordinary things into extraordinary things, water into raspberry juice, and cherries into rubies. Because my own hobgoblin's hat doesn't do magical stuff, I instead use it as a sort of garbage can. I throw into mine every wrong and injustice in the world. I write these wrongs down and I put them in the hat. Here's my hat. There it is. In the United States in 2020, you can see why the hat would be so heavy. My country's collapse in the face of the pandemic, our upcoming and could not be higher stakes presidential election, the dumpster fire in our political landscape, the fires and storms raging in our natural landscape. And at the center, our most recent reckoning with police brutality and the entire legacy of slavery on which my country was built. And yet, I want to talk about the things in this hat without giving in to despair. I want to be optimistic about all the things in the hat. I want at least to want to be optimistic, and that itself is a kind of optimism. You may recognize this happiness goal as a particularly American one, the one that punctuates our time-honored values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of optimism. Organizing, my life's work, is itself a kind of optimism. Organizing is based on friendship networks, on listening. It's based on relationships built on connection rather than persuasion. And it's based on those relationships going on and on forever. What could be more optimistic than that? That feels like a good place actually to conclude the talk. Relationships that go on forever. But no, not really. Lifelong relationships are beautiful and important, but I do want to get at something bigger. At the heart of relational organizing, there's one tenet that gives me pause. Not because I don't believe it. I know it in my bones. I hesitate here because when I share it, I'm met with disbelief and even derision. And that idea is this: anger itself won't work. You cannot organize a union on anger. You can't organize successfully around anger. A lot of people take issue when I say this, maybe even some of you listening here now. Though maybe less so because you are, after all, Canadian. In The Atlantic, I read a joke about your country's response to COVID-19. How do you get 20 Canadians out of the pool? You probably know the answer. You ask them to get out of the pool. This made me laugh And I'm especially happy to be able to share that laugh here, since Canada has stayed out of the pool long enough to effectively inhibit the spread of COVID here. I don't know how to get 20 Americans out of the pool. I mean, there are ways, but I don't know how to make the request nicely. When I say I know something in my bones, I recognize that that invites criticism. It sounds like folk wisdom, like an old wives' tale. That said, old wives know an awful lot. Science is only starting to catch up in its understanding of how the body stores memory. What we know in our hearts, our guts, the pits of our stomachs, and yes, our bones. Think of the profoundly different shapes our bodies have taken during these pandemic days. The ways cubicle dwellers have adjusted to their new seats at home. The way grocery store workers might have stood taller for a stretch at the start of the pandemic, when there was a collective realization of how much we depend on their being at work. Think about your own Zoom teleconference headaches. Think about physical weariness. During a scorching heat wave this summer, I was inside my living room, looking out the window, and a man was lifting my huge trash barrels and heaving the contents into the back of the truck. I've seen them do this work countless times, of course, but that day it stunned me. How are you working so hard? And it's 100 degrees. Your department is down 20 people. You have to do this hard work. What does the garbage collector know in his bones? I wonder. Workers, just like anybody else, can carry bad memories, even trauma, in their bodies. Fear is a kind of wisdom. So is anger. They're the body's ways of knowing what the brain has not yet comprehended. Fear and anger are good, useful feelings. They rev us up, they protect us, they ignite our passions. However, as some of you have heard me say before, the chronic stress of work, the constant fight or flight impulse, is having a profound effect on the American workforce. We can't adapt to living like this in an ongoing way. Black Americans now experience dual pandemics, systemic racism, compounded by the effects of COVID-19. Ruth King, in her book, Mindful of Race, Transforming Racism from the Inside Out, gets at the functions and the shortcomings of anger. Anger is not transformative, she says. It is initiatory. The August 23rd shooting of Jacob Blake, a Black man, by a white police officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin, spurred NBA playoff teams to organize a wildcat strike. Jamel Hill wrote in The Atlantic, "This was a historic act. Black athletes sent the message that America doesn't get to enjoy their talents if it can't respect Black people as human beings. These athletes have good jobs. They're highly paid. They're celebrated beyond what most of us can imagine for work that many of us dream of doing, for playing. But if even that can't protect them from the trauma, then how can those with fewer layers of protection be expected to manage the stress of working while Black in America?" In her amazing essay, Contempt as a Virus, Zadie Smith describes the situation for Black Americans like this. She says, "If our elected representatives have contempt for us, if the forces of so-called law and order likewise hold us in contempt, it's because they think we have no recourse, no power, except for the one force that they have long assumed, too splintered, too divided, and too forgotten to be of any use, the power of the people." Workers are thinking about everything differently during the turbulence of 2020. One thing that's mutating rapidly is how workers view their time and their schedules. More workers are fantasizing about what they would do if they had control over their schedules, even on the other side of the virus, when we're able to return to our workplaces. For Americans, this means thinking, for the first time since the fight for the 8-hour day, about short work. Shorten your day, raise your pay. Maybe 30 hours is full time. A 4-day work week? How about the 0-day work week? People who typically work in offices, but currently work from home, now want to be seen and listened to in a different way. Workers who are in call centers and billing offices continue to work hard from home. When I talk with them about their experience of work from home, it's not just, oh, I really like not having to pack my lunch, or I don't miss rush hour. What they love the most about the new world of work is absence of supervision. The productivity in these newly remote workplaces is the same, or maybe even improved. This leaves the managers of these command and control workplaces to discover that all their micromanaging was time wasted for 100 years. These managers, who no longer have to crane their necks to report who's taking too long to pee, might their bones feel some relief these days too? People are so happy to not be overmanaged, reduced to how well they perform the role of a hard worker. Workers don't want to be overseen in that way, but they do want to be heard. And what are these workers saying about the kind of workplace they want to return to? Some in this work from home group say to me that they will never go back. Talk about short work. But I wonder if they won't grow to miss complaining together at the lunch table. Really. Lily Tomlin said, "Man invented language in order to satisfy his deep need to complain." It was difficult, especially at the start of the pandemic, to observe the 2-meter distance. And not just because we couldn't picture it precisely with our stubborn American refusal to learn the metric system. We need to be together. As Patricia Madsen asserts in her book, Improv Wisdom, trouble's not so bad when we're in it together. But what's the difference between seeking out commiseration and looking together for good trouble and just stirring the pot, stoking anger? Making good trouble, doing it right, is more complex. I've been listening to organizers from all kinds of movements these last months: healthcare, poverty, climate change, of course, labor and work. During a webinar about returning to public school during the pandemic, Bridget Terry Long, Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, said, "I just hope when all this is over, we will remember what we saw and what was laid bare." I laughed. She couldn't hear me, I was muted, but I can confess it to you here. It was a kind of shameful laugh because it was cynical. I was thinking, we're not going to remember. In education, we hear teachers talk about the emotional whiplash of being heralded at the start of the pandemic of deserving $1 million a year, to mere months later being accused of being selfish for being afraid to return to school in conditions that they consider unsafe. In grade school, kids often learn about the magical, mucky transformation that happens to the monarch butterfly. Maybe you remember that the caterpillar melts down almost completely into goo, while in its chrysalis, the little creature dissolves and digests and rebuilds itself, a kind of butterfly soup. Research suggests that some memories survive the meltdown, that these creatures might retain some of the lessons that they learned as caterpillars. One study showed that moths can recognize dangers that they learn to avoid as caterpillars. How was that lesson carried along and reassembled inside the chrysalis from that moth gumbo? I wish that my hobgoblins had the power to enact radical transformation such as this, that everything inside could melt down, liquefy the whole mess of our current misery, and that we could reform and take flight, bringing with us the necessary memory. If this were possible, I wonder, what lessons would we take with us? I could push the metaphor. I'm already talking about hearts and hobgoblins, adding butterflies to the mix now. What's next? Flowers? Yes, sure. I recently saw a yard sign planted in a sidewalk patch of thriving zinnias in a Boston neighborhood. It read, "Do we really want to return to normal? Isn't it time we built something better?" Florists have a whole category of cubicle plants, the ones that can survive, if not thrive, with the least natural light, the least water, the least attention and care, let alone song. It's been proven that plants do better when they hear music, you know. Have you seen that breathtaking video of the string quartet performing at the Barcelona Opera House to a live audience of 2,292 plants? Those plants were donated to healthcare workers as a thanks after the concert. And I wonder how they're doing, the plants and the people now. Do the benefits of the music continue, or do they forget what they heard? That we reach for these metaphors is a reminder of how fantastical and out of reach real transformation can sometimes seem to so many of us. There's an idea I love. Learning is better than knowing. One thing organizers do is help workers recognize their capacity as thinkers. The working class contains a spectrum of learners, musicians, history buffs, and people who continually seek to improve their gardening skills. Alongside this, there's also a fear of learning. Lots of people didn't perform well in school. School is where you learned. Once you got free from school, you were supposed to be free from the need to learn. Maybe that's a fear of being tested, akin to the discomfort of being overly supervised, having to show what you know and stay at your desk or workstation. Maybe it's a distaste for command and control learning rather than learning driven by your own curiosity. Or maybe it's connected to a learning divide, a crevasse really, that begins before age 3 and doesn't get much easier to bridge. The famed 30 million word gap study suggests that by the time they're 3, children from high-income families will experience 30 million more words than children from low-income families. The number has come under scrutiny in the years since the study was published, but regardless exactly how many millions, the ramifications are profound. When I read about this study, it felt like a brick in my hobgoblin's hat. It felt like 30 million little flashcards, all crammed in the hat, far too many ways to say wrong, egregious, unfair, unjust. Writing in The Atlantic earlier this month, Michael Sandel described how in the past 40 years in the US, the earnings difference between high school and college graduates, what economists call the college premium, has doubled. The workplace should be the home of learning and thinking. Maybe you believe, as I do, that democratic practices, voice, and dialogue at work are the practice field for healthy participation in the wider world, outside of work. Workers are learning during the pandemic, finding their voice and the words to say it. People are finding new ways to speak and speak up that they didn't or couldn't articulate before the intensity of the pandemic. Workers in hospitals, schools, restaurants, grocery stores now expect transparency, expect to be part of the conversation about how to handle the fear, the risk, the workflow itself. And when they're not part of that conversation, they're offended. That's great. I've been waiting for them to get offended and to insist on being part of the conversation. Workers know more about the job than anyone else. How could we have been having all these conversations without their voices before this? When worker voice is not part of problem solving, there can be no problem solving. The new normal is, in some ways, the kind of normalcy I've dreamed of. It's normal for workers to be at the table, and normal to have dialogue, and normal to talk more candidly. You can go your whole working life without a voice in your workplace, but then a virus comes along, and suddenly, thrust into the role of representing yourself and your group, you find that voice. And as organizers, we must, with heart, listen. Relational organizing is dependent on the very basic idea that every worker has a voice. Real understanding of the world requires panoptical vision, the understanding that comes from sitting alongside people in every vantage point. And when we help to cultivate those voices, we must remember that the speaker might not be the loudest one. They could be shy, reticent, or funny, cheerful. The crucial thing is that they're loving enough and brave enough to learn how to participate in democracy, how to build it together and keep it going. They need the reserves of joy and hope that fuel their stamina and allow them to buoy others. My heroine, Mary Parker Follett, said it best. Democracy is an infinitely including spirit. If you don't know who Follett is, I implore you to look her up. You're on your computer. You can do it now. Google her. When we organized our union at Harvard, we organized around shared interests. And we had a lot of fun doing it. Balloons were a big deal. My greatest management opponent, Ann Taylor of Harvard University, who later became one of my greatest friends, told me, "You can never beat a union that sings." A song can make hard things, including anger, lighter, even funny. It has a transformative power for those who listen, and even more so if they can hum along. Leaders must be able to braid together these disparate voices that surround them, and this is only possible when they're well-versed in having conversations with people who do not agree with them. There's a spirit of accomplishment that comes from figuring things out together, even when you weren't immediate, obvious allies. These leaders build those relationships that will last forever, beyond any one moment, contract, strike, or election. You must be capable of having these ongoing inclusive conversations if you're going to change the workplace and the world. It's because I've witnessed the former that I continue to believe that the latter is possible. To find and nurture these listening leaders, we organizers also have to listen in a different, new way, a deeper way. We need to do a kind of persistent listening, an open-hearted listening. A listening that acknowledges that we don't always know what we're not hearing, what we miss thanks to our cultural blind spots, our unexamined biases, the racism baked into our American bones. To illustrate, I want to speak a bit about unconditional love. What? You thought in a talk about organizing with heart, we weren't going to talk about love? Well, what is it? What else is there really? What does it mean to love unconditionally? And to whom do we grant such unbounded acceptance, recognition, and care. Babies, maybe. They're the group perhaps most often met with this kind of love. They demand so much, and they offer so little, practically speaking. Of mammals, they take longest to develop even the most rudimentary survival skills. Even giraffe calves can unfold their akimbo limbs and make their way toward their mother's milk a few hours after birth. Human babies, meanwhile, take months to lift the weight of their own adorable heads. In some ways, we take for granted that we must protect them unconditionally. And yet, a study published last month showed that Black newborns are 3 times more likely to die when cared for by white doctors. The mortality gap between Black and white babies is wider now than it was during slavery. The fact that this gap grows still wider when a white doctor cares for a Black newborn says something. Something not only about health disparities, unconscious bias, it also must say something about listening or failing to. So where are we? We need to be together. We need to be connected, to listen to every voice. At the same time, we need to work and to act on what we hear. We somehow have to break things down in the cocoon and remember the important stuff and emerge in a higher state. How do we compare American life in 2020 to the life cycle of the butterfly? And hey, are we experiencing the metamorphosis yet? When do we get to muscle out on our delicate wings and experience the new reality? About that, good news and bad news. At its best, metaphor may be beautiful, and it may be instructional. But in the end, we all know, metaphor is just the wrong way of saying things. Beyond the basic failures of metaphor to capture reality, the concept of metamorphosis is a lifespan thing. Species and societies operate according to different rules, evolutionary ones. Even for those of us trained in science, it can be easy to forget. Evolution isn't designed to move species towards some ideal state. It's just designed so that living things can remain fit enough, healthy enough to continue being themselves. That's not going to stop me from working to flatten hierarchies of power. But it's important for us to recognize as we calibrate our expectations of success. Boston and Cambridge, where I live, contain rich diversity, but it's still safe to say I live in a very Irish corner of America. There's an Irish fighting song about it not mattering where you're going, what road you're on, as long as you're singing with your lads. In its way, that is an appealing thought, but it's only good for pub crawls and not for building a loving and durable society. As organizers, we have to sing together, and we have to be on the right road. I've said that in our work as organizers, we're developing a series of actions and interactions with others that last forever. But the conversations we have now can't actually last forever, can't establish relationships that last longer than our own lifetimes, or can they? In my own work, I've seen the suggestion of something bigger. Maybe you've seen it too, the transformation that comes when workers learn to use their voice, when they change their approach to solving problems by thinking together in ways that move beyond the scope of our own workplaces, our institutions, our boundaries, out into the world where we are all connected and where none of us is free until we all are. When transformation comes in the workplace or the world, it's born out of the understanding that we share responsibility for what happens next, that the future is not written, that we make it. This kind of transformation doesn't require a magical hat or a mysterious metamorphosis, but it is magical and it is a metamorphosis. It always comes down in the end, at every new iterative beginning, as Zadie Smith and countless others have said, this fact: we transform through the power of the people. Through organizing, we transform ourselves. There it is. What will we remember from this moment when we arrive at the shore on the other side of the viral abyss? Knowing, as we do, that there is no other side, only what we build together and what we sing together as we go along. I don't know, obviously, but I do have a strong hunch that there will be, in our workplaces, some kind of water coolers around which important stories will be shared. And I suspect on the weekends, however long those may be, we will continue to be able to watch the monarchs wobble past on delicate wings, in unpredictable winds, across countless miles, toward the impossible destination that every year they somehow reach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kris. I'm sure everybody is clapping. You can hear them through the virtual environment. Kris, while I'm waiting for people to type in some questions, and if you have a question for Kris, you can type it into the Q&A function, and I'll make sure I ask it. I just want to say that every time I hear you speak, I can see why you were so successful at organizing, because I even came into this talk quite exhausted, quite tired of all of the things happening in the world, and I get renewed energy every time I hear you speak. I feel optimistic. I feel like getting out there and making good trouble, as you put it. And so I think it's really interesting to me that you framed this as that anger is not as helpful as love, right? As organizing with heart. And I think that is in some ways such a radical idea in the current environment, because I've been reading so many books, going to webinars about how anger is therapeutic and how, we should be angry about all of these things. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit about, because I can feel it, right? It's that idea that I feel that the optimism and the hope and the positive approach and the good trouble is more energizing. But is there any place for anger at all? Is it sort of maybe a first step, or is it at all useful in any point? Or is it really that you think that it does eat away from the fabric that connects people, the tissue that connects people and helps us move forward?
Yeah, thank you. Anger is so real and so importantly and deeply part of who we are that it motivates us to do almost everything that we do. Having said that, when we isolate anger or we enhance anger or build it up so that it's our song or our voice, then we're doing something that I think really hurts us. One is we're not developing. We need to figure out how we can live over a long lifetime and understand that there's injustice and fight to eliminate it, but at the same time know that we're trying to build something better, bigger, more inclusive, happier, more transformative. Having said that, the thing I worry about is that this is a US thing. I don't know if it's a Canada thing. I worry that we don't invite people who can't express anger or rage to really protest. So, Kris is a long nonviolence movement, which has really always helped not only our country, but every country. But there are so many things that that regular people can't culturally participate in if they don't have that exact fire in their bellies. And in the US, I often think that, 90% of the people are at home and 10% of the people are protesting. And what we need right now in our country is, many millions more protesting. So you do need anger, but you kind of need to digest it. I don't want to say swallow it, because that's obviously psychologically very bad, but you need to digest it and own it, and it needs to come out as something else that can last over a long period of time.
Okay, I think we just lost Dion. I think she just lost her internet connection.
Oh.
Yeah, she did that. So maybe I'll try to jump in. So when you talk about anger, would it be, how would you consider transforming it into something more constructive?
Well, let's say for an individual worker or individual group of workers, I think that there's a strategic reason to moderate anger, and that is that you're close to powerless and you will lose and you will get crushed, right? And that anger is strategically reckless sometimes, and that it causes people, I think, to have to figure out how to really synthesize the anger and also, start to create a vision of how could we do this differently.
Right. Okay. So some of the questions that have come in, and now I've just figured out how to get to them. I think Anna will not mind my mentioning by name. Anna Verma says, would love to hear from her, Ray, employer opposition to organizing, which is in the American employer's DNA. Can she talk a bit about ways to deal with it in the past and going forward? What can we do to neutralize it, not in a given campaign, but as a society at a collective level? Well, there's a nice small question.
Yeah. It's a great question, and I'll start with the bad news and then the good news. So the bad news is that groups figure out how to beat these anti-union campaigns all the time. And then the campaigns themselves mutate to another level, and we have to learn it over again. And that's the bad news. It's a really organic process. But having said that, we know an awful lot about how to beat these campaigns. It's partly by organizing so deeply, and sometimes so quietly, but certainly so deeply that you cannot, and you can just prepare people for what's going to come. You can never underestimate what an employer's campaign is going to be like. They are so intense and they're so personal, and people get scared and shake, and they've had an enormous impact on our country, and they have been very, very effective. So to beat that, I often think it's impractical in a way. The depth and breadth of organizing that's required is to such a level that the campaign is seen coming and lived through by holding on to each other and hunkering down. People do beat them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that leads perfectly into the next question. What are some of the internal operational features of the best run unions?
Well, that's internal operational features. I would say the most important one is that unions know their members and know them all, and that's a daily function, and it's a tradition and it's more important than anything else that we do. It's more important than any conversation that we have with the employer. It's more important than any problem solving or grievance handling that we do. It's more important than negotiating. So the idea, yeah, you save hours a day to make sure that you're connected.
Yeah. Well, there's Dion back.
Hi, Dion.
I am so sorry, everyone. There's a massive thunder rain shower, and I think it knocked out our internet.
Oh, yeah.
Apologies. Carol, did you want me to?
Sure. So I just got down. I'll just read the next one so you can get caught up where we are. We're just down to the question that says, in light of the current reality and social injustices, what role can the labor movement play in moving this world forward? See, if you give us a nice big talk, you're going to get huge questions. What role can the labor movement play in moving this world forward?
Yeah, I hope it's a not depressing answer. I think that the role that we can play is by dropping our boundaries and merging with others. So it makes us maybe smaller and less institutional, but it might make the blending of worker centers and immigrant movements and First Peoples movements and Black Lives Matter, and can go on and on and on. But maybe labor becomes part of all of that. We've been, in history, we've thought of ourselves as leading that. And I'm not quite sure that it's the right time for that.
Dion, go ahead.
So there's a question from Tom Koken about, and he says, Kris, and Kris, I know you know Tom, he says how much he admires your organizing vision, and it really has worked. But the hard question, how do we get more people in the labor movement and other organizing groups to adopt your vision and strategy?
Well, Tom, I'm not sure that we'll be able to do exactly that. Although I think that it's not an idea so much as it's a practice. So if groups of workers have they have to solve problems and they have to speak up and represent themselves. They have an experience when they're doing this that, at first they're cynical about. It'll never work. I hate this, it'll never work. And then it works a little bit. And then they do it again and it works a little bit, and they do it again and it works a little bit. And I think in that case, what happens is cynicism dissolves a little bit, and it may be related to the larger anger questions as well. If you can make progress, if you can negotiate, compromise, have dialogue, if you can organize other people, and you start to have 1,000 little successes, you're different. And so it's through practice, I think, Tom. The ideas have been out there for a long time, and I think that we know it works. But it doesn't seem to work by just telling people about it. It seems like you have to walk through these practices.
So Morley Gunderson has a question. How would you recommend devoting resources to new organizing versus improving conditions for existing members in the hope of attracting new members versus the political arena to alter policies that help in organizing?
The last one is alter policies to help in organizing. Yeah, that's a different speech, I think. My own belief is that collective bargaining hasn't really worked over the long haul. And so we find ourselves in a situation in which we have this model that we rely on, and it's our framework, and it's all we've got. And at the same time, it's incredibly compartmentalizing, and it causes there to be a divide between, you know, making good trouble, having fun, organizing, and actually processing a worker's grievance through a legal adversarial system. And they both, you know, kind of cost money, and they're quite separate. But the collective bargaining model, you know, is very inhibiting, and it's very hard. I think it causes us to worry and spend our time and our resources on figuring out a snow day question, or you know, I mean, parking issues. You can't imagine how many labor leaders in America spend their time talking to employers for dozens and dozens of hours about a snow day. And that seems like it's not working. And to me, in a framework like that, I want to just get rid of it and come up with some other way of solving these problems. So I've tried not to have this bifurcation in our union, and don't hire lawyers, and have never used a grievance and arbitration mechanism in 40 some odd years, just because you really want to get at this other level where, you know, workers can even be coached through solving their own problems and negotiating their own agreements and organizing each other.
Thank you. I have a question about how, you know, you talked a little bit at the beginning about how employers are realizing that, or maybe starting to realize that they don't have to micromanage their workers as much. And I think that's sort of been an interesting realization. But my question is how open do you think that employers will continue to be, managers will continue to be, you know, if there's a vaccine, everything goes back sort of to normal in terms of safety, to rethinking current working arrangements for many people? How open do you think that they will be to that?
I've always wondered about what happens at that moment when a worker, which is basically all workers who become pro-union, when a worker decides they have the courage to be part of the union, or to be an organizer or an activist. And I think that there's a practice of, you know, standing up and saying, I'm with them, or wearing a button, or, you know, any such thing like that, that really is irreversible, that there's no going back. I remember a Harvard secretary told me once, after she had had a lot of different kind of lunch meetings trying to figure out whether or not she was going to be pro-union. And she was in her 60s, and she'd worked her whole life at the Harvard Law School. And she decided one day, I mean, she decided over a long period of time, and she decided that she was going to be part of the union. And that afternoon, she went back to her boss, and he had put his, okay, it's an old story, he had put his TV Guide subscription on her desk for her to, you know, re-up. And she picked it up, and she walked into his office, and she said, I can't do this anymore. And she didn't quit, she just didn't order his TV Guide. And there's an awful lot of that. And so I wonder if that's happening now during COVID. I'm fielding from all these workplaces, including workplaces without unions, groups of workers working together to figure out how to have voice. And they even call it like democracy club or, you know, something like that. So we may get crushed in it, right? It may be, right now we're not being crushed. If a hospital worker says, my coworkers and I think this is unsafe, what I'm noticing is that the management team will try their best, perhaps in the nicest way, to just pretend they didn't say it and they're not there. But during COVID, they just keep coming and they just keep asking over and over again, and they keep asking for these Zoom meetings, and we have to work this out. And I've just seen so much of this that a substantial portion of my day is spent helping people figure out what they're going to do next in this informal world of organizing. And whether we unlearn all those things is to be seen.
Hey, Brad James, our awardee, Sefton-Williams awardee for contributions in labor relations, has a question. He has a question about the current model of bargaining that you've expressed concerns about. He talks about it in terms of the current political debate. A good number of Democratic hopefuls for the presidential nomination had sectoral bargaining in their platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on the chances of sectoral bargaining gaining any traction at all in the US?
Yeah, I think I'm, Brad, I think I'm not qualified to answer that question. However, I can close my eyes and imagine that we had a country that could handle sectoral bargaining, and that we had then, which is the part I would have the most fun with, workplaces and institutions as sandboxes for voice. You know, that would be a wonderful thing. And I don't want to be, I don't know whether or not we can pass sectoral bargaining where, you know, right now it's hard to project too much into the future, but there's an awful lot going on, and we may lose, we don't want that. If we win, we have to be really ready to press sectoral bargaining with our new government. But it seems far to me. It seems like a hard thing. And we have so much else to clean up right now.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking a stab at that. I mean, that would be an ideal, I agree with you. I just think that would be an ideal system with the workplaces as the sandboxes for voice, as you say. I think that would be just such an exciting place to be.
Yeah.
Jen Harmer, one of our doctoral students, says you've touched on some of these already, but what research areas would you recommend students, doctoral students and research-based students should focus on who have an interest in unions? What are some of the questions that you would find interesting to be answered?
Oh my goodness. Wow. You could just kind of follow me around for a day and I could just say, hey, how about this? I'm not quite sure that I really know the answer to this. It feels like a time where it would be really good, for example, to know kind of psychologically what collective bargaining has done to us, and what collective bargaining has done to our imaginations, or even our energy. My personal experience is I avoid a lot of collective bargaining whenever I can because I find it de-energizing and marginalizing. I recognize how important it is to fight for the parking spot, and at the same time, I feel like the system has run its course somehow. And I don't think as a movement, certainly in the US, we're nowhere near that. We take a much simpler view. And so I'd be really interested to know if we could come up with a way to think about collective bargaining or a way to change collective bargaining so that it would be more imaginative, broader, more fun.
So there you go, Jen, what collective bargaining has done to us psychologically, possible ways forward. If there was well, actually, let me ask this first. How has COVID impacted, or if people haven't asked this when I was out for a moment, how has COVID impacted organizing efforts and strategies?
Well, there's been some organizing, right? There's been some organizing in the US, mostly in small locations, but that's what we organize in the US now. Right? We don't have big organizing drives. And I think that there's maybe a secret sauce to organizing during COVID, which is if you can get the person on Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or the phone, you can have fairly intimate conversations right now. And you don't have, and there are no bells and whistles. There's nothing that you can really do to organize without actually just having deep listening conversations with people. And so I think that's really good. And it seems to be effective.
Good. So Brad has one more question about what differences you see between electoral and political organizing and union organizing. Any similarities or differences between those two things?
Yeah, I'll speak to the differences. I think the electoral model, although it's undergoing some metamorphosis of its own in the US, but the electoral model is a kind of poisonous for thinking about forming unions. Unions are deeper, and they're connecting, and they're a thought process or people thinking together. They're not about persuasion or trying to get everyone to agree, but they're trying to get everyone to understand each other and to know each other over a long period of time. I think when we don't do that, when we don't organize deeply like that, and we just mobilize like in electoral politics, our unions are pretty weak. And so if we want strong unions, we need to know all our people and make sure that they're really, really connected. And if you do that, you'll have a really strong union. You'll have a happy union, you'll have a vibrant union, you'll have a great union that gets good contracts and doesn't have to suffer enormously to get them. But if our relationships with our members are flimsier than that, or they're in an electoral model, I think, to be honest, I think we just end up in arguments that last a short time and then go away.
So I think, again, just another novel idea, right? In employment relations, we're constantly thinking about the relationship between management and workers and employers and unions. And you're talking about the relationship among union members, which is something we don't talk that much about. So again, I think just another novel and union and organizers and members and the leadership and members. So I think that's great. Maybe one last question. For you, if there was one thing that could come out of the pandemic for workers, for unions, for organizing, for the country, even, what would that be? What would be your one wish if there was something positive that could come out of the pandemic? And how likely do you think it is that that would happen?
The thing I want to have come out of the pandemic is that we don't forget. You know, my Hobgoblins hat has had a lot of paper in it for a really long time. And there are people, probably all the people in this audience, who are always thinking about all the things in the hat and all the things that are unequal and unjust and wrong. But now, during the pandemic, at least certainly where I live, regular people who aren't thinking about inequality all day, every day, are seeing things that they never saw before. And they're seeing a lot of it. We also saw George Floyd murdered on TV. Will we forget? Or will we remember what we see? I hope more than anything else that we remember what we saw, and that those of us who are organizers can tell everybody, you could fix that if you wanted to.
Well, thank you so much, Kris. This has just been, every time I hear you speak, it brings tears to my eyes. It energizes me. It's just such a uniformly positive thing to hear you speak. And
thank you.
And I would love to invite everybody. We normally have a reception in Kura Hall with wonderful finger food, but we can't this year, unfortunately. But we hope to see you in person at some point soon. Carol, did you want to say anything before we let everyone go?
I just need to unmute myself. I just wanted to echo the thanks. As we said at the beginning, Woodsworth partners with the Center for the CIRHR to do these lectures. And there are times when I listen to the lecture and it's like, okay. And then this time I was like riveted by everything that you had to say. So this was just wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
And kudos to you for conquering the technological challenges too.
Thank you. I had help.
Right.
And thank you to all of you who've joined us from, I actually have seen people who are here from all around the world. And so welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. We hope to have more of these over the next year.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kris.
Thank you, guys.